The morning here is unnervingly quiet. A small, murky green pool sits motionless at the base of a cliff. No waves, no current, no visible sign of danger. But something about this place isn't right. The water is too still, as if it's hiding something beneath the surface. When you descend, the first sound you hear isn't the water. It's your own breathing, echoing steadily inside your mask. And with every meter you go down, that breathing grows heavier. This place doesn't kill with violence. It simply waits for you to make a mistake. In this video, we'll return to real events, real people, and decisions that could never be undone beneath this seemingly harmless pool. So what lies beneath this water that allows no mistake to exist? If you're drawn to true stories where humans confront the absolute limits of themselves, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Northern Cape, South Africa, on the edge of the Kalahari Desert. In the middle of an arid landscape where signs of life are scarce, there is a sprawling cattle farm known as Mount Carmel. It is so remote that reaching it requires hours of driving along unmarked dirt roads. At the edge of that property lies a small pool of water pressed against a rock face. The surface is murky green, perfectly still. No waves, no current. From the outside, there is nothing to suggest this is a dangerous place. The entrance to Bushman's Hole is narrow and unassuming. But just beneath the surface, its structure changes completely. A vertical shaft drops straight down before opening into a massive chamber hidden deep underground. The main chamber stretches more than 250 meters in length, nearly 80 meters wide, and descends to almost 300 meters in depth. At that level, natural light no longer exists. The space becomes completely dark, empty, and orientation depends entirely on guidelines and equipment. The water inside the cave is fresh water, remarkably clear. The temperature remains stable year-round. There are no strong currents, no tides, none of the features typically associated with danger in open water diving. That stability creates a dangerous assumption that this place can be controlled. But at nearly 300 meters deep, the pressure is close to 30 times greater than at the surface. The human body was never designed to function under these conditions. The lungs cannot operate independently. The nervous system begins to degrade. Every breath, every movement depends entirely on machinery. A small error in equipment, breathing gas, or judgment does not cause immediate disaster. The consequences arrive slowly, quietly. And once they begin, they cannot be reversed. The bottom of Bushman's Hole is not solid rock. It is soft silt and fine sediment. A single light impact can lift a cloud of debris, erasing visibility in seconds. When that happens, three-dimensional space disappears. Up and down lose their meaning. For deep cave divers, Bushman's Hole offers three things they seek: depth, stability, and an extreme physiological challenge found in very few places on Earth. Everything about this place encourages the belief that, with enough experience, strict adherence to procedure, and proper preparation, the risks can be managed. Bushman's Hole does not kill with violence. It kills through margin of error. And if this place is truly that dangerous, why do the world's most skilled divers keep coming back? In 1993, Bushman's Hole became the destination of an international team of cave divers. Their objective was not recreation, but exploration and preparation for a future record depth dive in freshwater caves. Everyone involved was experienced. Procedures were agreed upon. Roles were clearly defined. The shared assumption at the time was simple. If proper technique was followed, the risks could be controlled. Among the team was Bushman, a local diver. He was familiar with South Africa's sinkholes, accustomed to deep freshwater conditions, and considered to have an advantage due to his local experience. Booty did not arrive alone. He brought with him a friend, Evan Layden. Evan was not originally on the invitation list. His presence raised some concern, but not enough to halt the expedition. He was allowed to dive alongside Booty on an exploratory dive, not on the official record attempt. At the time, there was nothing to suggest this decision would be dangerous. The two entered the water and began their descent along the planned route. From the narrow surface pool, they descended vertically into the cave system. At approximately 197 feet, the space opened up. This was the first major chamber of Bushman's hole, a point where divers typically paused for a final check before proceeding deeper. At that moment, everything appeared normal. There were no alarms, no visible signs of trouble. But before the descent phase was complete, Evan had exhausted his first air cylinder. According to standard cave diving procedure, this should not have happened at that depth. He needed to switch to his backup supply. The problem was that the backup regulator was not accessible. It had slipped behind him and become pinned beneath his harness while he was gearing up. Evan was now out of breathable air, and he could not reach the next source. Loss of air does not cause immediate death. It causes something more dangerous. The brain begins to starve of oxygen. For a few seconds, Evan remained conscious. Then his ability to orient himself in three-dimensional space collapsed. Up and down no longer had meaning. A primitive instinct took over. Evan tried to swim straight upward. Inside a cave, that instinct is fatal. The ceiling of Bushman's hole is not an exit. It is a vast overhead space filled with dead ends and false openings. Swimming upward does not lead out. It only leads deeper into confusion. When Booty realized Evan was no longer beside him, he turned back to search. In the darkness, he saw Evan's flashlight moving erratically, with no controlled direction. By then, there were no viable choices left. Booty reached Evan, but Evan was already motionless. At that depth, Booty could not immediately bring him to the surface. Doing so would have placed Booty himself at lethal risk from decompression sickness. Booty had no option but to leave. When Evan was eventually brought to the surface, the support team began resuscitation immediately. More than 90 minutes of continuous CPR followed. There was no response. Evan Layden was pronounced dead at the site. He did not die because he lacked skill. He died because his brain no longer had enough oxygen to remember where he was. If a small deviation is enough to kill at this depth, what happens when humans decide to go even deeper? After the death of Evan Layden, Bushman's hole was no longer just an exploration site. It became a limit that needed to be measured. In 1993, one of the most recognized names in cave diving arrived here, Shek Exley. He was not a newcomer. Shek had spent most of his life entering places without direct exits, environments where every mistake carried a fatal price. His experience was not theoretical. It was built over hundreds of hours inside some of the most complex cave systems ever explored. This time, the objective was clear: to determine the true depth of Bushman's hole and to see how far the human body could go in extreme freshwater conditions. The dive unfolded in a setting the team already understood. No waves, no current, no external forces interfering. That stability continued to reinforce a long-held belief that with enough experience, sufficient preparation, and strict adherence to procedure, depth was merely a number. Shek began his descent along the guideline. With every meter, pressure increased. Breathing gas grew heavier. The body's reaction time slowed, though this was difficult to perceive in the moment. At 263 meters, he approached the biological limits of the human body. At that depth, there was no room for correction. No margin for experimentation, no safety buffer. Sheck reached the bottom, confirmed the depth, and began his ascent. There was no visible malfunction, no obvious incident. He returned to the surface alive. But for Sheck Exley, it was not a victory. It was only a temporary permission to return. He understood what had happened inside his body at that depth. He understood that it was not skill that brought him back, but the fact that nothing had yet drifted beyond the allowable margin of error. After this dive, Bushman's hole was marked, not as a place to be conquered, but as a boundary. Sheck did not view the 263-meter mark as an invitation to go deeper. He saw it as a warning. At that depth, survival is not guaranteed. It is a variable. And once such a marker exists, what happens when someone refuses to stop there? After the 263-meter mark, Bushman's hole was no longer an unknown. It had a number, and for some, that number was not the end. One of those people was Nuno Gomez. He was an engineer, accustomed to complex systems and to the belief that with enough understanding, everything could be controlled. He was also a deep diver, with years of experience operating at depths where the human body begins to behave differently. Before 1996, Nuno had already returned to Bushman's hole twice. The first time, he reached approximately 755 feet. The second time, deeper still, around 827 feet. Both dives ended early due to decompression issues. Not because of panic, not because of equipment failure, but because the body had clearly signaled that it was being pushed too far. Those signals did not create fear. They created a new assumption, that with better preparation, a larger support team, and a more detailed plan, the limit could be pushed just a little farther. In 1996, Nuno returned to Bushman's hole with a full support operation, including multiple divers and a doctor monitoring the entire dive. Everything was designed to reduce risk. Every procedure was reviewed. The descent began as planned. Nuno dropped faster than expected, but still within acceptable parameters. At that depth, time and distance begin to compress. Small deviations are difficult to detect. When the bottom appeared, it came sooner than anticipated. Nuno hit the bottom hard. The impact was enough to send silt and sediment billowing upward, filling the space and erasing all visibility. Within seconds, the environment went completely dark. At the same time, his body began to react. Nitrogen narcosis impaired judgment. High-pressure nervous syndrome set in, causing uncontrollable tremors and loss of motor coordination. His hands and legs no longer responded precisely to intention. Nuno became stuck in the mud. At this depth, there are no quick choices. No extra movements. Only a very narrow window before control is lost entirely. Nuno stopped. He did not thrash. He did not attempt to swim upward immediately. He inflated his buoyancy. A slight lift was enough to free his body from the sediment, allowing him to rise above the silt cloud. Visibility slowly returned. Control was restored, piece by piece. Nuno continued the dive. He reached a depth of 282.6 meters, surpassing the previous marker. But the most dangerous part was not over. Time at the bottom lasted only a few minutes. The remainder of the dive, more than 12 hours, was spent in a long, cold series of decompression stops, as the body slowly adjusted back toward lower pressure. He returned to the surface alive. But once again, Bushman's hole made something clear. Records are not defined by how deep you go. They are defined by whether you panic during the few seconds that matter. At this depth, 5 seconds of panic is enough to kill. And if the person who doesn't survive is not the one chasing the record, then who will be the next to pay the price? Before Bushman's hole became associated with record-breaking attempts, It was still a site for training dives, where support divers worked quietly in the background. One of them was Dion Dreyer, 20 years old, a support diver. Dion was not chasing records. His role was to be in the right place at the right time, ensuring that everything functioned smoothly for those going deeper. Before the trip, Dion received a call inviting him to join the support team for preparatory dives at Bushman's Hole. For a young diver, it was a rare opportunity. He agreed almost immediately. His family did not share the same confidence. Their concern appeared early and never fully faded. But at the time, there was no concrete reason to believe that fear was justified. In 1994, Dion arrived at Bushman's Hole for a practice dive. The objective was not record depth. It was to familiarize the team, test procedures, and carry out planned decompression stops. The dive began normally. Everything followed the expected sequence. There were no equipment failures, no obvious warning signs. As the divers entered the decompression phase, they stopped at their assigned depths. They checked on one another. Every signal indicated that everyone was fine. Then Dion was gone. There was no call for help, no distress signal, only a gap where he had been moments before. When the team looked downward, they saw Dion's light sinking into the darkness below, not along the guideline. With no sign of control, Dion was falling. At that depth, falling requires no force. A few seconds of unconsciousness is enough. The exact cause was never conclusively determined. The most widely accepted explanation was hypercapnia, the buildup of carbon dioxide in the body. Hypercapnia does not cause pain. It does not trigger immediate panic. It simply makes a diver feel slightly more tired, slightly slower. By the time the brain can no longer maintain consciousness, there is no time left to react. Dion lost consciousness and continued sinking toward the bottom of Bushman's Hole. No rescue attempt could keep up. At that depth, chasing after him would have meant placing another life at risk. Dion's body could not be recovered. Bushman's Hole kept him in a place no one could reach. There was no loud disaster, no explosive moment, just a human life disappearing in silence. What kills you does not always hurt, and if no one could bring Dion back, would anyone dare to try? After the death of Dion Dreyer, Bushman's Hole became an unresolved void. A body remained at the bottom. There was no recovery plan. And in the world of deep diving, that was not unusual. Years passed. Very few divers returned to this place with the intention of going deeper. One of them was Dave Shaw. Dave was an elite deep diver. He began diving later in life than many others, but progressed rapidly. His experience was not defined only by depth, but by his ability to control breathing, gas management, and equipment under extreme conditions. Unlike many before him, Dave used a rebreather. The system recycles breathing gas, removes carbon dioxide, and maintains a stable oxygen level. In theory, it allows deeper dives with fewer cylinders and reduces the need for gas switching. During an exploratory dive at Bushman's Hole, Dave reached the bottom. There, in complete darkness, he noticed a familiar shape, a body lying motionless in the silt. Dave recognized it as Dion. At that moment, no recovery operation was triggered. Bushman's Hole was too deep, too remote, too dangerous to justify a return solely for a body. But Dave did not leave with a sense of closure. He surfaced with a decision already forming. Dave contacted Dion's family. He told them he had found the body, and he promised to bring Dion home. That decision was not driven by records, not by recognition. It was driven by a promise. Once a recovery plan was set in motion, everything changed. This was no longer a solo dive. It became an operation. A support team was assembled. Staged waiting depths were calculated. Hours of decompression time were built into the plan. To document the attempt, a camera was mounted on Dave's helmet. It was a small addition, but it altered how Dave managed his light. Normally, Dave carried his light on his hand, and when both hands were needed, he clipped it to his chest. With the helmet-mounted camera, that routine no longer worked. A familiar habit was replaced with a new one, never before repeated under comparable conditions. There was no clear indication that this change was dangerous. Everything still appeared to be within acceptable limits. Everyone believed that with Dave's experience and the level of preparation involved, the risks could be controlled. But from this point forward, the story no longer revolved solely around pressure, breathing gas, or depth. It began to revolve around a choice. Some promises are stronger than the instinct to survive, and if this place does not forgive even the smallest margin of error, is a promise worth trading a life for. That morning, Bushman's hole was quiet, as it always was. There was nothing to suggest this would be an unusual dive. Dave Shaw entered the water first. This was a solo descent, timed down to the minute. The objective was clear. The route had been fixed. At a predetermined depth, Don Shirley stopped. His role was to wait. If everything went according to plan, Dave would ascend, transfer Dion's body, and then begin the long series of decompression stops that would last for hours. During the early phase of the dive, everything remained within acceptable limits. There were no abnormal signals, no warnings. Dave continued downward alone. When he reached the bottom, Dave saw Dion. The position was the same as before, but one detail was wrong. Dion's body was not fixed in the sediment. It was floating. Earlier forensic assessments had assumed the body would be fully decomposed, incapable of generating buoyancy. That assumption was no longer valid. Dave was forced to adapt on the spot. He began struggling to place Dion into the recovery bag. The task required more effort than anticipated. Time passed faster than planned. Dave's breathing rate increased. With a rebreather, this was not merely a sign of stress. It triggered a dangerous chain of events. Carbon dioxide began to accumulate inside the system. The sensation of air hunger did not arrive immediately. It came slowly, silently. Dave slipped into tunnel vision. His brain no longer processed the full environment. There was only one objective left: complete the task. As Dave started to leave the bottom, he was stopped. His light became entangled in a line. This was a solvable situation. Dave was carrying cutting tools. He had the equipment. He had the experience. But in a state of tunnel vision, the brain no longer prioritizes survival. It prioritizes the mission. Dave tried to free himself. Time continued to pass. His breathing continued to accelerate. Carbon dioxide levels exceeded what the body could tolerate. Consciousness faded rapidly. Dave Shaw lost consciousness underwater, and he died there. Above him, Don Shirley began to realize something was wrong. Dave did not appear at the expected time. Don chose to descend beyond his assigned depth. It was a reasonable decision under the circumstances. At greater depth, Don's equipment failed. The gas control system was compromised. He was forced to begin his ascent without automatic support. The decompression sequence lasted for hours. His body was pushed to its limits. Don survived. But the damage to his inner ear was permanent. The loss of balance never went away. It was not a major mistake that killed Dave. It was a small change. And once again, Bushman's hole proved something simple. The environment does not care about your motivation. Days after the fatal dive, as the support team returned to Bushman's hole to retrieve remaining lines and equipment, they found two bodies near the surface. Dave Shaw was still upright, resting against the rock wall. Dion Dreyer was tied to him with a rope. Dave had brought Dion to within reach of the light. There were no final words, no direct witnesses, only the outcome of a sequence of decisions unfolding exactly as they had been set in motion. Everything ended in silence, the same way Bushman's hole has always existed. After what happened, Bushman's hole was not closed. It was not surrounded by dramatic warning signs, but within the deep diving community, the name took on a different meaning. Limits were recalculated. Procedures were reviewed more carefully. Discussions about body recovery at extreme depth became more cautious than ever before, not because of fear, but because of a clearer understanding of a place where human beings are no longer allowed to correct mistakes. Bushman's hole is not the most dangerous place on Earth, but it is a place that does not forgive error. As technology allows humans to go farther, deeper, and stay longer in environments never meant for life, where does our true stopping point lie? There are places on this earth where humans are only temporary guests. If you're interested in real stories about human limits in extreme environments, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.